Everyone, Crystal K here to bring you part 3 of Winter in Love. If you enjoy, please leave a like. It has been 65 years now. Leo was out on his own since the Great War had finally ended 40 years ago. Akito was now a demon hunter, as was Lee. Akito, Leo, and Lee see each other from time to time. Akito had disguised himself as a cat demon so that he could hide from some people that were after him. He sneaked into a school. He had been injured in a fight against the enemy and needed a rest. Hiding in a room, he tried to stop the bleeding by applying pressure to the wound. When the door opened and in came a man that had wolf features. The man looked at Akito. When he saw the wound, he sighed heavily and walked over to him. Akito watched him carefully with his sickle at the ready if this wolf demon made a wrong move. The wolf demon, however, only did what he could to heal the injured cat demon. The wolf demon was largely built. He had a tail that one could tell was from a wolf, his ears set upon the top of his head. They also looked just like a wolf's as well. However, it was only when Akito really looked at the man helping him that he realized that he was not a wolf demon. In fact, he was truly a half-vampire, half-lichen. "You are Subaru, are you not?" Akito asked as he remained slumped against the cabinets of the room he was in. The man helping him looked at him at the mention of that name. "My name is Luca, however once a long time ago I did go by that name," the man said as he finished bandaging Akito up. "Nixana has been all over the world by now. She is 77 years old. To mortals she should be old and gray. However, to the Celestials and the demon race she is still just a child, a teenage child by now. She is sitting on a tall hill looking out at the scenery of the region she had stopped in for a quick break before she continued on to the next region for her duties as the winter goddess. While sitting there, a body sat next to her. He was of celestial making, she could tell. "Hello goddess, funny seeing you here," the male stated softly as he sat beside her. She glanced over at him with a brief smile as she gazed at him, her golden amber eyes taking in all of his features. He had forest green eyes, a strong jawline and defined features. His voice was deep and made her feel as if she could trust this man. "Hello," she said, her voice just like her mother's, just an octave above a whisper. She didn't know it, but word had spread of who and what she is, what she was capable of. Zeus had let word fall to not just those of celestial creations of the Child of Hope and Shadow, but also to the mortals as well. Zeus, desperate to end the life of the child, told the mortals that he would pay a bounty. Now she was being hunted by all. "I'm Michael, I'm an angel created by the gods," the male stated as he took in Nixana's appearance. "You are but a child, are you not, goddess?" Michael asked Nixana as she sat on the hillside. Nixana, however, looked at him as proud as can be. Though she still had a hatred for all those on the planet that had their loved ones and families when she did not. She took great pride in the fact that she had raised herself, and not just better than a parent could, but she had a kind heart as well. She had found several that had been injured that she had helped take care of. "I am what the mortals call a young adult," Nixana stated as she held her head up high. Michael nodded his head. Seeing how though she was a young adult she was very beautiful and by the looks of it very naive as well, he could use that to his advantage. "I know a place where you will be safe if you ever just want a home," Michael stated to her. Nixana, unsure of how to take this, looked at him trying to judge rather or not to trust him. "I do not even know you, much less trust you, Michael," Nixana stated as she scooted away from him some since he had sat pretty close to her. Michael moved closer to her still. "My village will take you in and help you," Michael stated, still trying to get her to trust him. He had to get her to go home with him to the village of angels so that he can get the bounty that Zeus had promised. "Go away, mister, I told you I don't know you," Nixana stated as she trusted in her instincts. They have kept her safe thus far, she would continue to trust in them. She stood up to get away from him faster when he grabbed her wrist to hold on to her. "Let me go," she yelled out, when a hand came out of nowhere and broke Michael's hold on her wrist, letting her go. Both Nixana and Michael looked at the owner of the hand to see a male that had dark hair and glacier blue eyes. With her wrist free, she ran for it, not waiting for an introduction from this new being that appeared. She hid behind a tree nearby. "Michael, you heard the lady, she wants you to leave her alone," the man stated as he twisted Michael's wrist, breaking it as he went. "Hey, Axel, why are you on Earth?" Michael asked as he grimaced in pain at his wrist being broken. Axel looked at Michael, his glacier blue eyes glowing into a red color as his anger rose. "That is not your business, Michael, go on your way now." The male known as Axel said. He was tall and muscular, with long black hair, glacier blue eyes that seemed to stare into one's soul. It was clear he was some kind of demon. After Michael left, the male being went to the girl. "You're safe, sweetie, come out," the male said as he got down on one knee before Nixana. Nixana poked her head out from behind the tree to look at him, her golden amber eyes staring at him softly. Who are you?" Nixana asked softly. Axel gave her a smile. "My name is Axel, what's yours, sweetie?" Axel answered as she finally removed herself from behind the tree. "Nixana," she answered softly, with her instincts telling her she could trust him. Because of her instincts, she threw herself into his arms and started to cry. Axel wrapped his arms around her, picking her up and letting her cry on his chest. "It's okay, sweetie, I'm going to take you to my home, you'll be safe there," Axel said as he opened a portal to his home in a separate dimension. Once the portal closed into his mansion, he set her down on a chair in the kitchen and grabbed her some water. "Here, Nixana, where are your parents?" Axel asked as she took a drink of the water. When she answered, her voice was soft. "I don't have any. I was abandoned as a child," Nixana answered after taking her drink. Axel felt bad for the girl. No child deserved to be abandoned. "You have a home here for as long as you want it, Nixana," Axel said as he sat beside her in the chair. Nixana took a moment to look at Axel more closely. She could tell that he was over the demonic race, but has never seen one like him. Axel did the same with Nixana. He knew about the Great War and did what he could to help both sides. He was not of the prejudice kind. He cared not if people were demon, celestial, angel, or half-breeds like Lee. As long as they were respectful, that's all he cared about. Nixana was just a child in the eyes of the immortals, and the fact that she was left abandoned when she was that much younger just made his blood boil. "Let me show you around, Nixana," Axel said as he stood up, offering her his hand. Nixana stood from the chair, placing her clawed hand in his. He showed her what would serve as her room. After showing her inside the mansion, he took her outside and showed her the different species of animals he had on what he called a reserve. The ones that she loved the most were the celestial dire wolf family, as well as the elemental dragons he had. Each dragon had given the winter goddess a scale as a gift, of which Axel made an item of jewelry for her. Each scale added a new gift to her powers. She made a very close friend in a Chinese water dragon named Zan. The celestial dire wolf family let her choose a cub to take on her journeys during the winter for protection as well as for company. She chose one that was an all-white one that she instantly bonded with. The white female celestial dire wolf, she chose to name Ariella. She did not know why, but that name rang in her head. Nixana was reticulate to leave Ariella so she could bond with her more. "You can take her into the mansion with you, Nixana," Axel said to her as she sat in the cave petting her. He could tell that she wanted to bond with the pup more before they left. Nixana looked up at him with a smile. "Thank you, Axel. Can I ask you something?" Nixana asked as Axel got down on one knee next to petting the celestial dire wolf he had bonded with. Ariela's father, Phobos, yes of course. Nixana, Axel answered as he looked at her while petting his celestial dire wolf. Why do the dragons and dire wolves give me their scales and child? Nixana asked as she looked at Axel. Axel nodded his head figuring that question was coming. They give them to show their appreciation and loyalty to the winter goddess. Each scale that was given to you enhances your abilities and will help keep you safe on your journey. Ariela will keep you company, and will protect you on your journeys. In fact, I know a spell so you both will be able to communicate with each other. Axel answered. Nixana nodded her head. She would love to be able to communicate with Ariela. A glow came from Axel as he started to say some words. When he was done and the glow was gone, Nixana could hear a voice in her head that wasn't there before. Nixana smiled as she continued to pet Ariela. She could hear Ariela's voice in her head saying that she loved how she was petting her. Nixana moved her hand to gently scratch behind Ariela's ear. Nixana stood up Ariela with her and Nixana bowed to the celestial dire wolf family. Thank you, for everything. She said to them. The father and mother celestial dire wolves, Phobos and Artemis, bowed their heads in respect to the goddess and told her you're welcome. Come on Ariela, let's go look around. Nixana said as she started to walk out of the cave. Ariela followed her. Once both were out of the cave they started to play around rolling on the grass and playing fetch. Nixana loved that she was able to finally act like a child without having to worry about looking over her shoulder for danger. Axel came out of the cave and watched the two with a smile on his face. Seeing this young goddess who he could tell had a hard life now being able to act like a child brought a smile to his face and a joy to his heart he hadn't known for many centuries. She seemed like a pure soul who he had an urge to protect. Protect her he would, which is why he was thankful that the celestial dire wolf family gave her a companion that would help keep her safe in the other dimension when he couldn't be there. Axel could tell that there was something special about this young goddess. Something that told him though she was celestial she was more than that and would become something that could lead all to a brighter future, not just the celestials but the demons as well. Though he wasn't a demon per se, he was actually a succubus, but still part of the demonic race, and knew a lot of spells. 200 years later, Nixana traveled back and forth between the dimension that belonged to Axel and Earth for her duties. Axel insisted that she always take Ariela with her. Ariela always did everything she could to protect Nixana. They have bonded so much together that Nixana's extra powers from the dragon scale jewelry that she wore flowed through Ariela as well as herself. Nixana was almost under constant attack. Someone that she had come to somewhat know, kept trying to kill her for reasons she didn't know. The woman always wore a long red cloak with a hood up that kept her face hidden. She carried a ruby-gemmed bow with what looked to be an empty quiver of arrows on her back, yet she always seemed to have arrows. Nixana has had a few run-ins with this woman whom she started to call Ruby because of her bow and cloak. Why won't you leave me alone? Nixana asked the woman as she kept backing away. Ariela had gone hunting to get them some dinner. A few months prior to this particular day, someone had left a sword by her side with a note saying happy birthday and that they hoped that the sword would come in handy. So she held the sword out though she barely knew how to use it. Your creation should never have happened, the woman stated as she was able to fling the sword out of Nixana's hands. Nixana didn't know what to do now. There was nowhere that she could run now. Unless she went to the one place that this demon could not follow. She could go to Axel's dimension, but she couldn't go without Ariela, and this demon might be able to follow her there. Instead she chose to go to the one place a demon cannot go. She vanished in a flurry of snowflakes, going to the celestial realm. As far as she could remember, she had never been to the celestial realm. She just needed cover until she could find another place to go. As she looked around the realm, she was in complete awe of what she saw. She had never seen anything look so beautiful before in all her days. "Hope, how is this possible? You're dead," a male's voice said from behind her. As Nixana turned around, she seen a man that was taller than her. He had big muscles that one could never get over seeing. "My name is Nixana, and I'm a celestial. I belong here with you guys," Nixana stated as she stood her ground. In the distance behind her stood Lee, watching as she made a grave mistake. The other celestials watched as well. Unfortunately, Hades and Persephone were in their palace in their own part of the realm. "Nixana, is your mother Hope?" the god of war stepped up and asked. "I do not know my mother," Nixana answered as she looked around at all the celestials that were there. "It is obvious that Hope was her mother. Banish her, Zeus," a woman stated. By the look of her seal, it was Athena, the goddess of wisdom. Zeus nodded his head and placed a curse on Nixana that should she ever return to the celestial realm, the sun would drain all of her life force and energy, slowly killing her the longer she was there. She could already feel it taking effect on her. She ended up on her knees before the king of the gods from the sun. "Unless you wish to die in this realm, girl, you better go back to Earth," Zeus' deep voice stated as he kneeled down before her. Then looked up at Lee and gave a nod. Lee walked up and grabbed a hold of the young half-goddess and flew her down to Earth. He landed in a small town known as Targavest in Wallachia. Letting her go, he looked at her. "You should not have come back, Nixana. Now you cannot return," Lee stated as he gave her a look. She had grown into a beautiful young girl. She definitely had her mother's looks, with some of her father's features. "I was in trouble and had nowhere else to go," Nixana stated as she looked up at the man that had saved her life twice now. Out of the tree line, Ariella came out, growling at Lee, placing herself between them. While Nixana slept one night, Axel came to Ariella asking her to do whatever it takes to protect Nixana. Ariella made it her personal mission to protect and accompany Nixana. She would not fail to protect her. Lee backed away from the female celestial dire wolf. To him, they were not reliable companions. Though he was raised by Phonexes, they weren't exactly trustworthy either. Nixana started to scratch behind Ariella's ear while telling her it was alright. "Ariella, it's okay, my friend. He won't hurt me," Nixana told her as she stood beside the white celestial dire wolf. Lee looked at them with confusion. "I see you have made a friend and bodyguard on your journeys, Nixana," Lee said, then took a better look at the wolf, seeing it was a celestial dire wolf and not a regular dire wolf. "Ah, you have met Axel. He is the one that commissioned your birthday gift for you," Lee said softly as held out the sword that he had asked Axel to make for her. Though he didn't tell him who it was for. Lee looked at Nixana and tilted his head. "We shall meet another time, Nixana," Lee said as his wings opened and he flew off into the air. "Nixana, there is something off about that half-god," Nixana heard Ariella's voice in her head as Lee flew off higher and higher away. Nixana nodded her head. "Yeah, there is, Ari, yet it seems as though he doesn't want to hurt me, only keep me safe," Nixana stated in response to Ariella's statement. "Yeah, I kind of got that feeling as well, Nix. No matter what, we'll look out for each other," Ariella said as she nuzzled her head against Nixana. Nixana nodded her head. "That we will, Ari," Nixana stated as she scratched behind Ariella's ears and sat down on the ground. They would make camp there for the night. Then continue on. In the morning they would head to Greece and on from there as they usually did. But first, after Greece, they had promised to go back and visit Ariella's family, and Nixana would visit Axel, take a break, and stock up on supplies for the next journey they would be taking. Nixana always made sure to spend a summer with Axel and all the animals he had on the property. She always made time to chat with the elemental dragons, especially Zan. He could speak English to her so she could understand him, and she always went and visited with Ariela's family as well. 50 years later, Nixana and Ariela had just left Axel's realm to start the winter moon of a small place called Troy off the coast of Greece. As Nixana and Ariela walked the beach, they came to the temple of Apollo. It had been desecrated, and she wondered why that so-called great sun god would stand for such blasphemy. Priests had been run through by blades and other weapons made for killing. Well, what a lovely creature to behold. A male's voice said it was deep. She turned to see who it was. Ariela beside her. Nix, this man means to take you. Ariela said as she stood between them, growling at the man. She knew he was mortal. Her hackles raised as she tried to scare the man away. The man was tall, standing at 5 foot 10 inches if Nixana had to guess. He had middle to his back-length brown hair that was graying and clear green eyes that reminded her of the dark waters that surrounded the island of Circe. Calm your pet, woman, or my men will kill it. The man's deep voice spoke. At which point a few more men came out of the shadows with blades drawn and arrows at the ready notched to their bows. Ari, calm yourself until we are out of the temple, Nixana said as she placed a hand on Ariela's head. Ariela looked to her charge with an internal smile that Nixana would know anywhere. Ariela stopped growling as she remained beside her charge. Now tell your men to lower their weapons, or she will attack and I won't be able to control her, Nixana said, playing off the fact that she was an innocent traveler and not the goddess of winter. The man nodded his head to his men and they all lowered their weapons and put them away. Ariela sat beside Nixana as she eyed the man before them. Tell me, my lovely lady, what brings you here? The man asked as he walked around her, and Ariela then headed outside where Nixana and Ariela followed him. As they walked, Ariela started to get antsy, waiting for the chance to attack, waiting for Nixana to give the word. Nixana watched the man as he talked. I have heard stories of the Trojan temple of Apollo. I wanted to see it for myself. What happened to it? Nixana asked as she looked at the building they stood in front of, then to the water that glimmered from the sun's rays. Shining like millions of diamonds and gems were hidden just under the surface of the water. My men took the beach in less than a matter of minutes. The Greeks are going to war against the Trojans, the man said. You, my dear, are just in the wrong place at the wrong time, he said as he glanced behind Nixana to the men that were there. Both Nixana and Ariela, feeling uneasy about the situation, now looked at each other, and just as the man signaled to his men to take the girl and subdue her pet, they jumped into action. Ariela put Nixana on her back and jumped to the beach from the temple, while Nixana blinded them with the sands of the beach in a giant wind blizzard to cover their escape. Once inland and away from the Greeks, Ariela stopped while Nixana got off of her back. Well, that didn't go as predicted. The Greeks have horrible timing about this, Nixana said softly to Ariela as they rested on the sands. Ariela nodded her head as she laid down beside her friend in charge. Nix, do you know who that man was? Ariela asked her friend. Nixana shook her head. No, however, I have an idea. I think that was the King of Kings, Agamemnon, Nixana said as she looked back that way. If it was, it's a good thing I didn't show him my power, Nixana said as a shadow formed over them. Ariela quickly moved to protect Nixana, as Nixana stood up to see who was there. Calm yourselves, I will not harm you. I am Achilles, son of Peleus, the man said as he sat before them. He looked up at the woman and knew from her features she was not mortal, just as he wasn't. I am Nixana, this is my friend and companion, Ariela, Nixana said as she looked at the man. His eyes were as clear as the blue waters near the shores of Greece. He had shoulder-length sandy brown hair that brought out his eyes even more, making them seem as if they stared into your soul and knew your darkest secrets. It is nice to meet you, Nixana. Ariela, you both seem tired, Achilles said, glancing between the two of them. Nixana glanced at Ariella. "Ari, can you fight if needed?" Nixana asked her friend. Ariella nodded her head slightly as she then looked the male that had called himself Achilles up and down. It was very clear he was a warrior from his armor and the blade at his hip. "We had to run from the beach. A man tried to capture me and subdue Ariella," Nixana said as she watched the man. She could tell that there was something different about this man. "So you met the King of Kings. Not a very nice man," Achilles said as he gave a saddened smile to the young girl. Nixana nodded her head. She figured that that was who it was. "Forgive me if I'm prying too much, however you are not human, are you, Lady Nixana?" Achilles said softly. Nixana looked from the man then to her hands, seeing the claws that were at the ends of each fingers. There was no point in lying to the man. "No, I am not. I am half celestial, and half demon," she said as she waited for his reaction. He nodded, not afraid and not raising his weapon. "Want to know a secret?" Achilles said as his eyes gazed into Nixana's soul. She nodded her head. "I am a half-breed as well. My mother is a goddess, my father a mortal king," Achilles said to her as he kept his eyes on her, showing her he was serious. Nixana's eyes widened. She had never met another half-breed before. "You are a demigod?" Nixana asked, starting to get excited at the thought. Achilles nodded his head to answer her question. "Why are you here, Nixana?" Achilles asked softly as he moved closer to her. Ariella moved between them to protect her friend. Achilles stopped at seeing the celestial dire wolf move between them. Nixana placed a hand on Ariella's head as she moved to sit down. "I am the goddess of winter. It's my job to bring the winters to the regions," Nixana answered him. Achilles nodded his head. "I understand that a goddess' duty is never fulfilled," he said with a slight chuckle. Nixana nodded her head. "Is there a place around here where Ariella and I can stay? I really don't want Agamemnon to know about me. He will use me just as he does your strength and fighting skills," Nixana asked softly as she moved closer to him. Achilles nodded his head. He would invite her to stay by his side. "I have a tent set up to the side of Agamemnon. You and Ariella will be safe there," Achilles said to her, after which she gave him a look. "I would rather not be around anyone," Nixana said softly as she gazed at him. Achilles nodded his head in understanding. As a half-breed he also preferred to be away from people. "There is a cave near the water's edge if you would prefer to stay there," Achilles stated as he gave a bright smile, then noticed the sword on her hip. "Are you a fighter, Nixana?" he asked. Nixana looked at the sword and shook her head. Though she had the sword for a while, she did not have any training with the blade and if needed always used her powers to fight. "Not with weapons, I am not. I have no training with them. My fighting is usually with my powers," Nixana answered back. Achilles nodded as he thought they would be at a dead end with war for a while. He could train her to fight with her blade. "Well, then with your companion, and your protector's permission, I would be honored to train you to use your sword," Achilles said as he glanced at Ariella, who looked dead in his eyes, trying to see if he meant Nixana harm. "Ariella, I will not lie. When training her there is a high chance she could get hurt once in a while," Achilles said to Nixana's friend. Ariella looked at Nixana. "Training might be a good idea for you, Nix," Ariella said to her charge. Nixana nodded. "And learning from Achilles will be even better. He is a legendary fighter," Nixana replied back to her friend. Ariella looked back at Achilles and laid her head down near his feet. A sign that he had her trust for now to train her friend and charge. "She gives you permission, Achilles," Nixana said to him as she pulled the sword out of its sheath so he could see it better. Achilles took the sword in his hands and looked at it and saw how well crafted it was. "Your sword is beautiful, Nixana. Who created it for you?" Achilles asked as he handed it back to her, gently handle first. Nixana took the sword and placed it in the sheath that she had taken off of her hip, and laid the sheath and sword on her lap. I do not know, it was left for me a few years ago for a birthday gift. Nixana answered as she gazed down at the sword in her lap and then started to pet Aryella as she laid next to her. Achilles nodded his head. He leaned a hand out then stopped. Aryella, may I pet you? Achilles asked of the pure white celestial dire wolf. Aryella looked up at Achilles then glanced at Nixana knowing that Nixana already knew the answer to that question. Aryella took after father when it came to protecting her charge and always remained on guard unless they were home in Axel's realm. Actually Achilles Aryella has to get to know someone before she will let anyone pet her. Nixana answered for Aryella. Achilles nodded and looked back at Nixana. When would you like to train, Nixana? Achilles asked Nixana as she looked around them. They were far enough from the kingdom of Troy, and far enough from the King of Kings. We can meet here every day that you have time. I know it will take more than one day to train. Nixana replied back as she looked back at him. Achilles nodded that it would take more than one day. They would have to find somewhere hidden and roomy to train the goddess. I am all right with that, but we will have to find somewhere hidden from the kings and roomy to train you Nixie. Achilles stated as he looked at Nixana. She smiled at the nickname and came up with one for him as well. I might have a place but I will have to get permission from the owner to use it, Achilles. Nixana answered thinking of hers and Aryella's home realm. How long will it take for you to get an answer? Achilles asked as he looked at her. There was something about this young goddess before him that gave him the urge to not just to train her but to try and protect her if needed.